Life certainly is different now, but one thing hasn't changed, and that's no matter who you are, education has the power to bring out your potential, to propel you forward, no matter your background, where you are from, or what you want to achieve. At MBCC, we're still committed to hands-on learning and instructor-led education, whether that's in person or virtually through connected classrooms. Just remember, education knows no boundaries, and neither should you.
Good morning, everyone. Bon matin à tous. Welcome to this morning's Breakfast and Learn Atelier de Matin, presented by the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Moncton. My name is John Wishart, and I'm the CEO of the Chamber, and I'll be your host and moderator of today's presentation. I want to thank you for tuning in this morning as we discuss today's topic, Trust in Artificial Intelligence. Yeah, what about it? It sounds like a pretty cool title, so I'm anxious to learn all about it. But before we dive into that topic, I would like to introduce Erin Cushing, who's the Coordinator of Entrepreneurship, Research, Innovation, and Experiential Education at MBCC. The Chamber is very fortunate to have MBCC as presenting sponsor for the entire Breakfast and Learn series. And while we'd normally be at MBCC Moncton this morning enjoying breakfast in person, we're pleased to be able to continue to present this series virtually, at least until maybe September. And then, Erin, I really hope we can start to meet in person again. So, Erin, please feel free to say a few words.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. And as John has said, the college is really excited to be able to continue to sponsor this series. And like all of you, I am eager to get back in the building and be back face to face with all of you from time to time. So normally we'd be in the Moncton campus, and I'm looking forward to the time when we can do that again in the coming weeks. I just want to briefly draw your attention to one initiative that we've got going on at MBCC. We're embarking on a project right now to articulate the MBCC advantage. It's the thing that sets the college apart, what makes MBCC really special and different from other post-secondary institutions in the province and in across Canada, actually. We've got a survey that's up right now, and we're asking for just a few minutes of people's time to complete that survey and just talk about some of your opinions, your thoughts about what the college is doing and what makes the college special. So I will paste that link in the chat. If you could take just a couple of minutes out of your day at some point in the near future to complete that, that would be much appreciated. But enough about me and what the college is doing. Looking forward to what Wilco has to say today this morning as well. So thanks.
Thanks, Erin. As we know, artificial intelligence is taking center stage in our society, yet AI means different things to different people and organizations. In addition, there are some concerns rising whether we can and should trust AI systems. So in today's presentation, we'll learn firsthand about how to demystify AI and explain in some lay language what AI is all about. We will then discuss the current AI challenges as it relates to topics such as bias, lack of transparency, and black box AI systems. And finally, we'll share some thoughts on how to design and build trust in AI systems. And we're very fortunate today to have someone to lead this discussion who knows a thing or two about artificial intelligence. Wilco van Ginkel is Missing Link Technologies AI lead and director of client relations. He's a seasoned professional with in-depth knowledge and extensive international working experience in the field of artificial intelligence, data science, and cybersecurity. And he's worked at strategic, tactical, and operational levels within startups, as well as small, medium, and large enterprises. Wilco is the founder of A3i, an AI company, Seculior, a cybersecurity company, and CSA Dutch chapter, and co-founder of the CSA Big Data Working Group. He's a frequent speaker, lecturer, and author with a focus on trusted and responsible AI. So as you'll see, we're in very good hands today for this topic. Avant de vous présenter notre prochain conférencier, je veux vous rappeler que vous pouvez poser une question à tout moment pendant la présentation en utilisant la fonction Q&A au bas de l'écran Zoom. Nous répondrons autant de questions que le temps permettra à la fin de la présentation. I want to let everyone know you can post a question at any time during the presentation. Please don't be shy by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible as time allows. So that's enough of the preliminary talk. Now it's into the meat of the presentation. And so let's get to it. I'll turn the microphone now over to Wilco.
Good morning. Bonjour, everybody. John, thank you very much for your kind introduction. As John said, my name is Wilco van Ginkel. And if you figure out like, it's a kind of a weird name, that's because I'm Dutch originally. But I came to Canada in 2007. So I consider myself pretty much Canadian at this point in time. I am the AI lead and director of client relations for Missing Technologies, which is a company here in Moncton, 60 people, where we work hard on software development, data science, data analytics, AI, and telecom. So MLT.ca is the website if you're interested. And if you have any questions after the call, sorry, I should say the presentation, please feel free to reach out to myself. The email address is pretty simple, wvg@mlt.ca. Okay, so as John alluded to, there's a lot of stuff going on in our society when it comes down to artificial intelligence, amongst many other things, obviously. And I'm very passionate about trust in artificial intelligence. That has a personal reason, which I'm not going to discuss today, simply because of lack of time. But I have a huge interest in that. And I have given it a lot of thought, like what can we do about it for society? And what I want to do today in that regard is so essentially very applicable. What is for breakfast today? So first of all, AI in under 15 minutes. In other words, as John said, ask 10 people about what artificial intelligence is, and you get 10 different answers. This is not something new to artificial intelligence. You find it in any new technology. For example, if you talk about what is blockchain, you get 10 different answers. Or what back then in 20, 25 years ago, what is the internet actually? What is the World Wide Web, etc., etc. So this is common when relatively new technologies emerge. So what I want to do to set the center stage is what AI is in under 50 minutes, so in lay people's terms. Then I want to talk about AI and black box systems, which leads me at the end to, okay, how can we design, think, build trust in artificial intelligence? So what are the takeaways for you today? First of all, I hope that after this presentation, you are able, in lay people's terms, to explain what artificial intelligence is at your next party. I mean, we always, we have turned the corner with COVID, it seems like. So hopefully, let's say September, October, November timeframe, especially here in New Brunswick, obviously in August, we can truly have face-to-face parties. And wouldn't it be awesome if you come in and say, give me a hug, let me tell you about artificial intelligence. The other one is, okay, understand why trustworthy artificial intelligence, depending on the context, and I will explain what that all means, is key for our society, at least in my humble opinion. And the third one is, okay, how do you design trust in artificial intelligence? Now, this is all great, and it is great. I want to put one word of caution here. The topics in this presentation, they run very deep, wide, and are very complex. I've been thinking about this for quite a few years now. So you can imagine that there's a lot of thought process going in there. So this presentation is going to give you a 100,000-foot level overview. And that's simply because of time constraints, also because of the audience. So please keep that in mind. So the takeaway is not like when you walk away, you know everything, you know everything what it needs to know about artificial intelligence or how trust in AI works or how to design it. You really scratch the surface of a huge iceberg. Okay, so keep that, please keep that in mind. But as I said, hopefully you have enough ammunition to have a decent conversation, I would say, about artificial intelligence, and in particular, what they call trustworthy artificial intelligence. All right, let's get to it. Anytime or every time when I do this presentation, I always put this slide first, which is what I call views on the AI spectrum. So if you look at our society, there are essentially two ends of the spectrum. One is a dystopian, like people who think AI isn't technology, true, but it will put us all in a zoo, okay? Or AI will end humanity. Resistance is futile. So this is really the dark side thinking, I would say. On the other hand, there's the utopian view, like it's our savior for our planet. It will help mankind. It will be our new co-worker. It doesn't really matter to me, to be honest, where you are, because at the end of the day, most people are somewhere in between. And even if you're pure dystopian or pure utopian, again, it's not a matter of right or wrong. It's a matter of how comfortable are you? What is your view? So hopefully, maybe after this presentation, you may shift in this spectrum or not. Maybe if you're a dystopian, you might say, well, I'm even more dystopian than I was ever before. Or maybe you shift to the utopian spectrum, or from a utopian spectrum, you might say, like, I thought this was the holy grail. This was awesome. Now that I know more about black box AI system and stuff that can go wrong, maybe I'm a little bit more leaning towards the dystopian or somewhere in the middle. I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's just putting a spectrum out there for a reference, so to speak. Okay. Now, if you look at artificial intelligence, there are two ways of dealing with this. One is to give you all kinds of definitions. It doesn't really make sense for the reason that, as I said, ask 10 different people, you get 10 different answers. So your definition is as good as mine. Okay. So what I would like to do when I talk about artificial intelligence in lay people's term is more talk about, let's say, characteristics or components that makes, in my opinion, artificial intelligence. So first of all, artificial intelligence has characteristics, which I will talk about in the next slide. AI is not just one thing. Okay. Learning is key, and not all AI is created equal. So those 4 boxes, so to speak, or components, so you will, I will discuss over the next few slides. And after that, you should get a feeling like, okay, now I understand what AI in lay people's term is about. Okay. So AI characteristics. If you all break it down, it essentially comes down to 3 major components or 3 major characteristics in my view. 1, AI tries to emulate intelligent behavior, quote unquote human-like. Now, this is a very slippery slope to start with, because there's a huge philosophical debate, always has been, if you go back to Socrates, for example, Plato in the Greek literature, all the way to up until today. What is the definition of intelligence anyway? What is the definition of behavior? So, for example, a computer who plays chess, is that intelligence? Yes or no? Some people might say yes, because the computer understands the rules, it can apply the rules, so that's a kind of human-like intelligent behavior. Another group might say no, it's not, because the computer does not really understand chess, the philosophy or the feelings behind it. It's just a matter of following a program, following a set of rules, essentially, which it is. So anyway, I'm not going into that because that's a huge debate by itself. But high level speaking, 100,000 foot, remember, it tries to emulate intelligent behavior. It does this by learning, and I will come back to that later. This is the key thing, what makes artificial intelligence is the learning component of it. And learning, it learns by means of data and statistics and math. And then it is implemented in/using technology, most of the time hardware and software. The latter one, so the second one, learning, again, is also a philosophical debate, because what does learning really mean? It's a mental transformation of the brain in individuals. But if you talk to a neuroscientist, for example, you probably get a completely different answer than you talk to machine learning or an AI expert, for example, okay, or a philosopher has a different view on this altogether. So again, those are components that have deeper meaning. And technology is pretty obvious, hardware and software. This also is much wider than you might anticipate, because there are now thoughts about, for example, stuff like Neuralink, where we connect systems to the brain directly. There's even talk about analog systems. There's even talk about computing in DNA. So this is a whole wide field by itself. So again, 100,000 foot level, it emulates intelligent behavior by learning using technology. That's essentially what artificial intelligence is. Okay. Now, so the learning part is the fundamental difference. The fundamental difference compared to how we, for example, build programs versus how artificial intelligence uses the data. So artificial intelligence is not programmed in the traditional sense. Like you've got data and a program, you've got output. For example, I've got web content, I throw some JavaScript or HTML at it, and I get a web page. Or I've got a relational database with credit card transactions. I have Excel, I read that in, and I create a nice visualization. That's data plus program is output. What it does, instead, it uses statistics and mathematics to try to learn patterns in data or abstract rules out of data. So, and it also defines how well the learning process performs, because if you cannot measure how the learning process performs, you don't know as a system whether you're aiming in the right direction, yes or no. Okay. To be clear, there is programming involved. So sometimes people get the impression like there's the thing called magic box. Okay, I just throw in my data and boom, magic happens and I get something out of it. That's not how it works. There's a lot of statistics and mathematics, and for the people who are a little bit more ingrained in this, so statistics, for example, there are stuff that use like F1 scores, root mean square average, which is a way of measuring the performance. For the math, there is which is called gradient descent, which uses calculus, in particular derivatives. That's all. That's the deepest I go during this presentation. But that's the typical math and stats that you find. Okay, but that stats and math that doesn't live by itself. It needs to be applied. So when we talk about programming, it's programming those statistical and mathematical rules. Okay, in order to look at the data from that perspective and abstract patterns and insights. That's essentially what it is. I mean, again, 100,000 foot level. So let's talk about a few examples to make this a little bit more concrete. The maze and the robot. So as you can see here, let me see if we can quickly point a laser pointer here. So this is a maze, obviously, a starting point somewhere here, and then there's the yellow exit. And the goal is to, given a starting point, any starting point in the maze, it doesn't have to be particular here, find the exit, which is the yellow box, and minimize the penalty. So what is the penalty? So for example, if you run into a wall, you don't get kudos. So in a traditional way, we would try to program like, okay, I am here, I know I'm here, so I take one step right, and then I have to go 2 steps up, 1 step right, and try to find the optimal path. But you really have to program it. So really determine what they call deterministic, okay? Instead, what artificial intelligence does is you give them a few rules. You might say, okay, you're a robot. I'm not going to tell you how to solve this. I'm only going to tell you 2 things. 1, you can move forward, backwards, left or right, 1 step at a time. 2, if you hit a wall, you get a penalty of -1. So you, Mr. or Mrs. Robot, your task is to find your way. I don't tell you how. Find your way using those movements, okay, from here to the exit, and minimize the penalty. In other words, minimize, so essentially the optimal way is 0. Because anytime when you hit a wall, you get minus, okay? Now, there is an interesting video on YouTube on this that it starts to iterate, and you see it bouncing back, and then slowly it starts to learn. Okay, so it learns how to move this. Now, you might say, oh, robot, maze, this is like Mickey Mouse stuff, which it was 20, 25 years ago. Nowadays, we have moved forward, because if you're really interested in it, and this is what they call reinforcement learning, I would highly recommend you to go watch the documentary AlphaGo on Netflix, which is about Google DeepMind has built a system called AlphaGo that was able to beat the world Leo Sedol, who's here, the world's champion in the game of Go, which is supposedly the most complex game in the world, is at least if you look at the number of combinations, okay, which is more than the number of atoms in the universe. And it learned this by just observing the boards and trying to abstract rules and optimization strategy. So it was not programmed like, okay, if a move is this, do this. No, that all by itself was learned by AlphaGo. So very interesting to see how far we have. One is called Breakout. So for those of you, and I'm dating myself, if you were in the Atari games, you probably have played this game at one point in time. Again, the same thing, just apply a system to it and learn how to play Breakout, okay? Without telling exactly, now you have to move the pedal to the right, now you have to move the pedal to the right, or the left. Another one, OpenAI, this has defeated Dota 2. Dota 2 is a massive open multiplayer game by, again, just observing how other teams play and just learning from it. Okay, so this is really fundamental, the fundamental difference. Another one closing to home is recognizing objects. Okay, so facial recognition, for example, on your iPhone or your Android or on your Apple Watch, that's all being done with artificial intelligence, in particular subfield of it called deep learning. So to recognize objects. Again, those objects, for example, recognizing a face, are not being programmed like, okay, these are 2 eyes, this is a nose, this is a mouth. It's done by sample data. So how this works, very high level, very quick, is you give the system hundreds of thousands of examples of faces, all kinds of faces. And the system is going to try to figure out essentially what makes a face. So for example, the first picture, it may just randomly just say something like, this is a half cat. It's just random stuff. And you say, no, not true. Next picture, oh, this is another half cat. No, not true. By the 100 or the 1,000 picture, it might say, well, this is a dog. Not true. But then over time, you start to recognize like, hey, there's a commonality here. Because every time when I see a face, I see eyes. I see a nose. So the system starts to learn the components, how a face is being built up, essentially in layers. And at one point, it will start to recognize, okay, this is how a face looks like. I mean, there's a lot of complexity behind it. I'm not going into that. But this is a very applicable today. I mean, you find it everywhere. Unlocking your phone, as I said, Facebook photos recognition, Instagram, when you post a picture, it will recognize faces, etc. So very close to home. Again, systems that are not programmed in the traditional sense, but they use a lot of statistics and mathematics in the background to get to where they need to be. The last one, what they call recommender systems. You've probably seen that before on eBay or even when you go to Netflix. So this is, for example, Spotify. I'm a big fan of music score composers. You compose, for example, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And so they say like, okay, so because you like Howard Shore, maybe you are interested in these albums as well. And the same here with books. And the way how these systems work is they start to learn like your behavior. Like, okay, so Wilco, he likes music composers, Hans Zimmer, Howard Shore. So maybe we can give him some new insights in that. And the same in Amazon. I'm 100% sure that you have seen this. That's what's called recommenders. Again, not programmed in the traditional sense, but just observing your pet, your behavior. And essentially, Amazon is working on a system, or they may already have that system in place. That the plan is, I'm not sure if this is going to happen, but the plan is that they're going to send you, if you opt in, they're going to send you items and information that they are pretty sure about that you want to. For example, a book that you have not heard about, but this is a book in a certain topic. Based on your behavior, they will say, chances are, let's say 89% that Wilco is interested in this book. So instead of waiting for Wilco to order the book, why don't we send it to him? So you see how far this is going. This gets to a little bit of a slippery slope, like how far are you getting into my life, despite the fact that I opt in, etc. Okay, that's about the learning part. AI is not just one thing. Okay, this looks very busy, and it is, to be honest. But I throw this out here because you probably have heard and read about terms like, okay, I hear machine learning, I hear the term neural networks, I hear deep learning, I hear reinforcement learning. And then I hear something like static rule-based systems, knowledge systems. So how does it all relate? Now, because we're talking about 100,000 foot level, I have no problem personally if you would call AI machine learning and the other way around. Technically, this is not 100% correct because machine learning is the biggest subset within AI, because AI is also, back then, a static rule-based system or knowledge system. So for example, a static rule, which would be programmed, would be if you have high fever and you have a dry cough and you have difficulty breathing, there's an 80% chance that you have COVID-19. That's a static rule based on medical literature, based on let's say what happened in society. This is how you would do it, like a decision tree in a program. That's the traditional way. In the AI way, it will say, don't tell me anything, just give me the data, and I'm going to find abstract rules that look like this simply by looking at patterns. So AI would look at the data and will distill this pattern, while in traditional programming, you program this because based on previous knowledge. Okay. The same with knowledge systems, like in the medical world, in the lawyer's world, there's a lot of corpus, what they call, so medical literature, for example, or legislation and what have you. So knowledge system is really like, okay, I need to know about this case versus this case, or I want to know more about MLS or more about cancer treatment. Okay, so you just type in that keyword and boom, you're being flooded with information. Within AI, it's more finding patterns and insights in that in that corpus. So can they abstract some information out of this? So that's the difference. So again, I just want to make sure that AI is not just one magical thing. It's kind of an umbrella, but there are many different systems under it. For now, again, machine learning, given that is the biggest one, you also read a lot about machine learning. If you feel like, you know what, forget about all this. For me, machine learning is AI, AI is machine learning. That's fine with me in this stage. Okay, remember the third component was not AI, not all AI, should I say, is created equal. And you may have seen this before. So we are now in an era, and for quite a while actually, for a few decades actually, where we focus on what we call narrow AI. So narrow AI, as the name implies, it focuses on one specific task, and it does it very well. For example, self-driving car, or image recognition, or game playing, or recommended system. It may or may not be better than humans. So for example, if you look at MRI scan analysis, now there are systems out there that do a better job than radiologists for some types of cancers. Okay, so it's a myth when people think, oh, AI is taking over the world. If you want to become a radiologist, forget about it because you're out of a job. That's absolutely not true. Okay, AI is definitely getting better, but it's a slow progress. So there are certain types of breast cancer where AI systems are on par or slightly better than a radiologist, but there are numerous other cancer or MRI scans, so to speak, out there where the systems don't know what to do about it. So I just want to put it in perspective. Another thing is, it's narrow for a reason, is that it focuses on one component, okay, as I said, but that's the only thing that they can do. If I have a self-driving car, I can tell the car, like, hey, take me to the next Starbucks, and the car will perfectly and safely do that. But if I ask the car, order me a Starbucks or make me a coffee, then it's okay, all lights are off. Okay, so it's very narrow defined, although you might argue like image recognition is narrower than, let's say, the self-driving car. So within the narrow spectrum, there are different grades, so to speak. But at the end of the day, the keyword is it focuses on one thing in particular. Okay, so that's narrow. And that's what today's AI is all about. Now, you may have heard about the term artificial general intelligence. So what this tries to do, it tries to get AI on par or equivalent to human intelligence and cognition. Now here we get on the slippery slope again, because what is human intelligence and cognition? So there are AI systems out there, for example, that can create art, that they can write poetry, they can compose music, to the point there is a famous and huge debate about a year ago, 2 years ago, well, 1.5 years ago, sorry, about a domain. It's called NLP, which stands for natural language processing, which are systems that can read text, interpret the text, and, for example, create summaries. Or, for example, if you look at YouTube and you have the caption on, some of those videos are automatically being generated. Those subtitles are not being done by humans, but they're just being generated by a system. And there is a system out there that is so good that we are now getting at the point, like, this system can generate text that is equivalent to humans. So it's very difficult to decipher from a human. And when you read two texts, like which one is generated by an AI system, which one was written by a human. It's almost like if you're familiar with the Turing test, like can you distinguish between the two of them? Now, if you talk to the experts in the field, the predictions ranges from in a few years from now to a few decades to never. I honestly, I don't know. I don't know where this is going. What I do see is it's getting better and better. And at the end of the day, I think it doesn't really matter whether it's available or realistic. I think what matters is, well, it is important, but what is more important is can we come up to a common definition of human intelligence? Because I might think that the system is AGI for a certain level of intelligence, while other people think, well, no, you're just getting started. This is nowhere near where we need to go, right? So there's a huge debate about there's a huge debate about definitions in the first place. Anyway, there's a lot of research going on, and you will see white papers or news press releases every now and then. Like, we found the Holy Grail. Please take it with a grain of salt. I mean, I do not want to underplay or underestimate the amount of effort that goes in there, because there's a lot, but there's also the marketing spiel around it. So the only thing I want to say is be cautious about it, okay? And then there's the third one, which is the top of the pinnacle, super AI. It surpasses human intelligence. So Neil Bostrom has written a book called, I think, The Final Invention, which is all about, okay, there's one invention we still do, which is essentially super AI, and then all bets are off, because this is a Skynet scenario kind of thing. The AI system takes over, they rule the world, so there's no place for us anymore. Or there is a place for us, but we are not on the top of the picking order anymore. If we are lucky, we are on the second place. Who knows if this is going to happen? Time will tell. I believe that if this ever will happen, the same with AGI, that I probably will be 6 feet under. So we'll see. Time will tell. Okay, so that was a brief introduction, maybe a little bit over 15 minutes, about artificial intelligence. Okay, so hopefully this gives you a little bit of a feel like it's not as mysterious anymore. It's not as like, okay, this is like a tsunami of information. I don't know what's coming. Not so scary maybe. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of a feel like, okay, this is what it's all about. All right, now let's go to the meat of the presentation, which is AI and black box. So there is a growing concern in our society, and I'm pretty sure that everybody who is on this webinar, it will not have escaped you, is that AIs can be developed as a black box. So what it essentially means is that we don't really know how some of the AI systems really work. More precise, we know how they work, but we cannot explain the outcome. Even more precise, that where the learning component comes in, we don't know how to optimize the learning. Remember, I was talking about what's the difference, well, the learning part, and I also explained that the way how AI systems learn is based on example data and how to measure performance, okay? So at one point in time, an AI system, for example, a neural network, comes up with an optimized strategy, let's call it this way, if you're into the field, the optimized set of weights between the layers, and it does its work. Input goes in, output goes out. For example, Wilco goes to the bank, Wilco applies for a mortgage, system says yes or no, okay? If the system says no, Wilco wants to know, why is that? If the bank says, I don't know, the system says no. That's, of course, unacceptable, at least for me. And it's like, so if you cannot explain how the system works, you can't get into potential real trouble. So to be clear, I'm not saying that every AI system is a black box, not at all. There are AI systems that are black boxes purely because of the algorithms and the way how they're being built, okay? But black box is not only because of the algorithms. Black box might also be the case because intellectual property, okay? So there's a famous example of a system called Compass, which is a system in the US used for parole. So the system will take inmates' information and will come up with a risk score whether this person can be released on parole, yes or no. And it has been shown that this system is biased. Okay, and I will come back to bias in a minute. Biased against black people. Now, you might argue, no surprise, you see that all over in the society. That doesn't make it right. So there's a huge debate with this company. This was a few years ago. The company like, okay, we want to see like, how do you build a system? And they keep their cards close to their chest because it's their intellectual property, it's their commercial product. So the black box is not only, again, how you use certain algorithms, but also a question of intellectual property, for example. Okay, so the question is, can we still trust these systems? Now, the whole notion of trust is a different discussion by itself, but think about this for a second, just to put it in perspective. When you step into a plane, okay, there are two pilots, pilot and co-pilot, okay, and there's a whole crew. But the majority of the plane fly by himself. By the way, I'm a pilot myself. That's why I came to Canada, actually. So every time when I hear, oh, the pilots just go in the cockpit, they click on flight start, and they take from A to B, that's complete nonsense, okay? There's a lot of stuff going on in the cockpit with the procedures and setting up the autopilot and monitoring the systems, etc., etc. But it's true that there's a lot of automation. So a lot of the flight, maybe 80, 90% is done automatically. Can it be done 100% automatic? Yes, but that's normally not how it goes in commercial flights, okay? So my point is, you step into a plane, you have no idea how the plane works, unless you're a pilot. You have no idea how the systems work. So you put your trust in the airline company. But the plane is a black box to you. So the question is black box something new in our society? No, not at all. We have been using black box technology from the get-go, okay? So the question is, can we trust these systems? Well, if not, if this is a problem, at the end of the day, the answer to this question lays on the context, okay? So let me put it in perspective. Let's talk about recommended systems again. So Netflix and Amazon. Let's say you watch Netflix a lot, and let's say you like House of Cards. Just random example. You watch House of Cards, and then you watch some other series, and the system, as I said, they start to look at you. Okay, what are you watching? And they come up with a completely different recommendation. They might say, "Oh, maybe you're interested in Broadchurch." Okay. Now you start watching Broadchurch. I say, this is not my show. I mean, you spend maybe one episode and it's like, no, this is not for me. So what happened is you get a recommendation that you don't like. You may have spent 30 minutes, 45 minutes of your life watching something that you don't want to watch and make a conclusion. Is that a huge impact on your life? Not really, is it? It's just, okay, you wasted 30 minutes. That's it. Okay, so the impact of this, getting the wrong recommendation, is not as huge. If this happens all the time, then you start to wonder, like, this recommendation system of Netflix or Amazon or wherever is not really that good. I'm shutting it off, or I'm not going to use it. But that's the end of it. Okay. Now let's talk about profilers. So here you see physical self versus digital self. This is very interesting. This is one of my favorites. So what happens in society is over the last few decades is the following. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, let's say the phone was an extension of your digital physical self. Okay. Now your phone is your digital self as defined in society, and you are an extension as your body of your phone. But what I mean by that is that the way how companies and organizations look at you, for example, on social media or in financial institutions or insurance companies, is purely based on a datafied society. Okay, so we're getting datafied as individuals, and we know this because we provide a lot of information for free. There's a famous expression: if you don't understand the product, you are the product. Okay, so if you look at social media, people say, oh, this is awesome, this is all free. And it can be awesome, don't get me wrong, but you have to pay a price for it, which is your data. So the Googles, the Facebook, the Instagrams, they have a very accurate digital profile of you, which represents you in the digital world, whether this is true or not. Okay. So what starts to happen is the mortgage example that I gave you is like the system says no to Wilco when he applies for a mortgage. Why is that? What is the logic behind it? Why does the system say no? So the digital profilers is something that really touches your individual self. Okay, so that's getting okay. Not getting a loan or a mortgage, it can be quite impactful. So I really want to know what's going on here. The other one is, for example, MRI scan analysis. Let's assume you go to the doctor, you have an MRI scan, and they say, you know what, the system says you're good. There's a tumor, but tumor is malignant, or it's benign. So you're good to go. 3 weeks later, you get a call, and they say, well, system was wrong. It's malignant, and we are 3 weeks later, so we're in a different situation. Stuff like this happens. Stuff like this, and this may sound weird when I say that, stuff like this has to happen for us as humans to evolve. That's how we as humans, some of us, have to make errors in order to learn. As a matter of fact, every human has to make errors to learn, but there are errors, and there are errors in capitals. Okay, so this is an error that you don't want to make. The question is not, are we not going to make these errors? We will make these errors. Okay, I will give you a few examples in a minute. The question is, when we make this error, or when the system makes an error, the system is built by us, can we go back and see what the error is, what the root cause is, and can we fix it? That is the question. So, and of course, the intention is to avoid them, but I don't think that the attitude should be, we should not make any errors in the system. That's simply not how humans work. Okay, when we build stuff breaks. So the question is, when it breaks, do we know why? Can we avoid it? And then the other one, self-driving cars running over pedestrians, not a cool thing. Again, has happened. The question is, why did that happen? How can we fix it? So these are just a few examples, and there are many, many more, where the context really defines if in black box system is being used, can we trust it or can't we trust it? And even if it's not a black box system, if it is an AI system, can we trust an AI system to drive a car, yes or no? And some people will say, absolutely. If you look at the research, more than happy to do it. And some people say never all my life. And then I would argue like, okay, but you step in a plane, no problem. The risk from an insurer's point of view, when you walk on the streets or you drive your own car, is way higher than the self-driving car. So if you're a number guy or girl, the data speaks. But then again, it makes us humans to have emotions, right? So anyway, this is more of a philosophical debate. So very quick, because keeping an eye on the time, some real world painful examples, and you may have seen this because it has been in the press, at least some of them. Another documentary which I would highly recommend is Coded Bias on Netflix. So Coded Bias is about bias in facial recognition. So the gist of the story is that it has changed, it has improved, but the gist of the story was that facial recognition was discriminatory against darker skinned people. In other words, not so much discriminatory, but more like discriminatory in the sense that it did not a good job of recognizing the faces compared to white people. Okay, and that has to do with the way how it's being So you ask yourself, how is it even possible? How is it even possible that a system can do it? It's very simple. Remember, I was talking about learning. A system learns based on data. Okay, so if you feed the system the hundreds of thousands of pictures as I alluded to earlier, and let's say 95% of those pictures or 90% of those pictures are white people, okay, no wonder that the system is very good at recognizing white people. If the minority is darker skinned people, whether it's Asian, African, Black American, the system has difficulty. Like, I haven't seen that much. I'm not 100% sure. I don't know who this is, or that's why it happened. It's not that the programmers themselves deliberately, I'm not saying it never happens, but deliberately build this in, like we should not recognize black people. Okay, but it's all about the data that's being fed. So the learning part is very important from a data perspective. So the whole discussion about bias in data is related to that. So highly recommended to see that. In 2016, this has been improved, and I still keep it here, is look at this. So there are 6 pictures here, automatically classified, skyscrapers, airplanes, cars, graduation, bikes, boom, gorillas. What the hell? This is not a gorilla, obviously. So this was a Google facial recognition, okay, that classified black people as a gorilla. That's awful, absolutely awful. And again, this is not something that Google did on purpose, but it had to do with the learning system, okay? So stuff like this happens in daily life. It has been corrected. It's very painful that it came out, okay, that this was not being catched when it was what they call during the validation or the testing stage, okay? But it happens. Tai, this was a robot, a chatter robot built by Microsoft, and here it comes again, the data, the training data. It was trained on data from the Twitter sphere. So if you look at Twitter, of course, millions or messages a day, if not billions by now. So they fed the robot, which was a chatbot, an AI system, all that information, and tried to see if the robot can learn itself to communicate. It could, but then at one point, people started to figure out, and it was within 16 hours, so 1/6, that this bot actually was a chatbot, was not a human, okay, and was learning Twitter feeds. So guess what? Some people with a kind of a sick mind, in my view, they started to feed it like Hitler was a great guy, Holocaust never happened, Jews are bad people, and within that time frame of 60 minutes, this chatbot became a racist by a god. So the robot or the chatbot started to spit out stuff like that. So Microsoft had to shut it down, so they did the right thing. They improved the system. There's Type 2 now, which is much better. But again, this happened. And why does it happen? Not because Microsoft developers did it on purpose, but the example data was biased or was just wrong in some circumstances. The last one, AWS, Amazon, they had to shut down a recruitment AI system because it started to prefer male candidates. Surprise, surprise. Why is that? Well, very simple. So this system was supposed to get resumes, process the resumes and say, okay, Wilco's a good candidate, John's a good candidate, Aaron, not so much maybe. Not picking on Aaron, by the way, just as an example. So the point here was that the system was trained on resumes from primarily Silicon Valley. Now, if you've ever been in Silicon Valley it's changing, but back then, primarily white, Caucasian, between 20, 25, 30 years old. Again, the same with the coded bias example. The majority of the resumes were white, Caucasian, male candidates. So the system learned to those resumes, and most of those resumes were impressive. So those are good. Anything else is bad. So learning is awesome. Can be awful if the data is not being thought out. Okay. Now. I'm running a little bit over time. I will finish on time. But the third one, how to build trust in artificial intelligence. Because then the question is, okay, if this stuff happens, why is it that we have to do it after the fact? We have seen it with numerous technologies. The reason why the internet is inherently secure, it has been improved over the last decade, but it is inherently secure because the TCP/IP protocol was never built with security in mind. It was built for resilience. Okay, so now we get all kinds of duct tape solutions to make it better. And again, it has improved. I'm not gonna lie. But fundamentally, there was a design decision made which we didn't take security into account. With AI, we are in a similar situation now. We are at the beginning of an AI era, and it goes very fast, where we have the opportunity, in my view, to design to build trust by design in artificial intelligence, essentially. Okay, how does it look like? Again, 100,000 foot. So there's a framework that I developed. It's called the Trust in AI framework. So you see 3 components here: data, infrastructure, model, secure, safe, explainable, and context. So let's break that down. The key thing, in my view, is it has to be a holistic approach. What you see now, there's a lot of attention, rightfully so, on bias in data because of the stuff that went wrong. There's a huge debate about what they call transparency of algorithms, like which is related to the black box. Like, do we understand the algorithms? Do we understand how they work? Can we explain the outcome? That's all great and good, or all well and good, but it's focusing on a subset of the puzzle. So, for example, I can have a system that has no bias, that has great data privacy protection, that has great data protection overall. I can have a model that is extremely good, that is transparent, I can explain it, but it runs on an infrastructure, for example, in a cloud, that is completely insecure. That doesn't make sense to me. That's like going to having an MVI with a car, and they look at your tires, they look at your wheel, and say, car's perfect. They don't look at your brakes, for example. Okay, and it goes for any combination of those two. So you have to look at these 3 as a kind of a triplex, and they have to be in harmony. Okay, so that's why I'm looking at data, infrastructure, and models individually. But at the end of the day, you have to look at holistically. So it's the sum of the components which makes it strong. So the weakest of these is essentially what defines how trustworthy the AI system is going to be. So if you look at the 3 things here, so safe is the system does not cause harm to the world. Okay, so for example, a self-driving car is not supposed to run over a pedestrian or run into a wall, for that matter. Secure is the system or the world cannot cause harm to the system. In other words, take the self-driving car again. Self-driving car cannot be hacked, ideally. Okay, and then explainable is we can explain why the system performs, why it works the way it works, how it's being built, how the output comes to be, etc. So those are the 3 components. Now, again, there's a lot of you can drill this down into maybe 6 or 7 other components. For example, people might say, yeah, what about transparency? What about accountability? All true. But again, if you put it high level in just a framework, these are the 3 pillars that I find the most important. And then there is the context. So the context is like, okay, do you really have to take care of all those? Well, it depends. For example, if you have to do with the GDPR, the privacy law, yes, you do, when it comes down to data privacy, for example. So there's an article 25 or 22 in the GDPR that says, when you have an automated system that makes decision for European citizens, you have to be able to explain how the system works. So if you have a black box system that you cannot explain, by default, you are not complying with the legislation. So that's something that you may think, well, I don't really care. Well, bad luck for you. You have to, if you deal with information from European citizens, for example. Then there's the whole ethic debate. There's a group of people out there, thank God, that says, like, I just want to do the right thing. Okay. There's a business environment. CEOs out there, they might say, well, you know what? I don't really care. If the proverbial shit hits the fan, I will clean the fan and take it from there. Other groups of people might say, you know what? Related to ethics, I want to do the right thing because don't forget that all the AI systems that we build now, first of all, is legacy, which is by definition the case for legislation. But most of those AI systems may have a profound impact on society. In other words, we are building the AI as a part of our societal DNA for our next generations to come. So when you lay on your deathbed and you look back and you think, shit, I built a system that is really awful, and my grandchildren and my children, they're getting the brunt of it. Do I want to be that guy or girl? Okay, so this is more of an ethical thing. Anyway, there are many different components which defines the context, and it's the context, as I explained initially, like why should you care about this, and or when not. So just the last few slides, just a few examples. So for example, when you talk about data, you talk about data provenance. So data provenance is all about where does the data come from? Can I go back and define the data lineage? So from the raw data up until it ends up in the system, can I have that full overview? Do I know if something went wrong along the way? Bias maybe creeped in, or data has been changed, unauthorized, etc. So the bias in data, I talked about data privacy issues, for example, with the GDPR, data protection in general. So the whole data part, you may have heard the expression like data is the new oil. Yeah, maybe true, but oil is just crude oil. It's worthless until it goes to a refinery. So if the data is the oil, then the AI system is the refinery. Okay, so that's why it's important. Like, okay, how do we deal with the data within the refinery? It's a metaphor. The other one's the infrastructure. As I said, infrastructure is like essentially a bunch of servers, network components, whether it's physical in your data center, whether it's in the cloud, in the virtual environment, doesn't really matter. It has to live somewhere. It's not like it's magically in the sky somewhere. So the question then becomes, okay, if I have an AI system running on Amazon or on Google or on Azure or whatever it is, so who has access to it? So identity and access management. How does the processing work? What about storage? Who has access to the storage, etc. So this is more of a cybersecurity thing, but nevertheless very important. And then the last one is model. So this is machine learning models, AI models. What are the type of algorithms that I use? So for example, if you look at algorithms, and again, this is too detailed for this presentation, but if you look at algorithms, you can create a spectrum. So there's a spectrum of algorithms that are very easy, powerful, and transparent. So for example, decision trees, which is literally decision trees that you can follow from the top, the root to a leaf. Like, okay, I know this decision tree, how this decision was being made. And most knowledge systems back then, 10, 15 years ago, and some of the AI systems, they are built that way. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm just saying that decision trees are very simple. For example, linear regression with lines, it's very simple, very transparent. All the way to deep reinforcement learning or deep learning, where you get more into the nitty-gritty of certain algorithms, where it's much more difficult to really understand what's going on. Okay, and there is work done to get better, but there are certain systems that are it's more black box. So from a business decision, for example, you might argue, as a final example, you might say, listen, I've got a system that does an excellent risk assessment for mortgage people, whether they default or not. It gives me a 95% accuracy, okay? But I don't know how to explain it. Versus, I have a system that I can fully explain, but has an accuracy of 80%. So my risk essentially is about 15% or 10% extra. If I use the black box system, I have a risk of 5% that people default. If I have a system, a non-black box system that has 80% accuracy, I have a 20% risk at default. Now, from a business decision, you might argue, well, you know what, you should go for the 95% because you want to reduce your risk profile, right? On the other hand, if you have to deal with legislation or you want to do the right thing, you may not be able to get away with it. Okay, so this is where it all gets into context. Okay, and then 24/7. I'm not going to do it. This is my final slide. I'm a little bit over time maybe, so I want to give the word back to John, probably, if there are any questions or whatever people want to throw at me. So thank you very much for your time so far.
Thank you. Merci, Wilco. It is now time for Q&A. It's going to have to be a short one of about 5 minutes. So if you do have a question, I'd ask that you post it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Wilco, I've got a couple here that I'd like to ask. When people think of AI, I think one of the greatest fears they have is artificial intelligence is going to mean the end of my job. How do we counteract that feeling in society here?
Oh, fantastic question. Fantastic question. So first of all, you have to classify the job in clusters. So some jobs will be gone over time for sure. So take, for example, the self-driving car. Now, if you look at taxis, at one point you might argue there's no need for taxi drivers or Uber anymore because the cars are driving themselves. The same with there's a huge investment done in the transportation industry. There's a huge demand for truck drivers now, but maybe in 10, 15 years, those people may be out of a job. Okay, so there's clusters of jobs that has an impact, but that doesn't mean that those people that's one. I'll come back to that. Then there are clusters of people. It also creates a lot of new jobs. So these systems need to be built. These systems need to be maintained. Then the third one is that people may, depending on the job, may shift their focus. So for example, if you do a lot of the ground legwork, take for example paralegal. Okay, if you look at paralegal work, it's a lot of groundwork. It's not. I probably offend somebody here, but it's not. Well, rocket science is my view. but it is work. So why can't an AI system do the groundwork so that the paralegal assistants can do more of the higher skilled work where machines are not good at it? So it really a couple of things. So first of all, it depends on your job, but this has an impact. I do not believe for a second that AI will take over the world and will take over any job. There's actually, as a matter of fact, there will be more jobs created than there will be lost. We have seen that with other technologies. But it leads to a very interesting conversation, which is universal basic income. So the universal basic income is all about like, okay, now a typical a truck driver, for example. Let's say a truck driver, he or she is 55 years old, has done it for the rest of his life. This person is out of a job, is in a stage in his life or her life like, okay, really, are you really want to do a different career? Maybe you're never all to learn, but you might also argue, if we as a society, it's an ethical question, if we as a society bring systems to society to improve society, but with the price that people lose their job and income, then as a society, I think that we have to own up to that. Okay, so we have to compensate those people. So either retrain them, or maybe go into the whole conversation about universal basic income. There's much more to say that, John, but that would be my 2-minute answer to it.
Okay, thank you. I'll pose one final question. If somebody with a company organization listening this morning, how do they somehow engaging with AI might seem a daunting task? How do they get started in this world as maybe a small entrepreneur?
Yeah, good point. So first of all, so I've started up a few companies myself, and one of the things that I learned the hard way is focus. So in other words, don't try to be a jack of all trades and a master of none. Take something that you're passionate about in the AI world, okay, and run with it. So how do you come back? So my journey for artificial intelligence started from a personal reason. Okay, I took that at heart, and I was looking at AI from that perspective. So my advice would be for somebody who wants to get into the AI world is 2 things. One, learn a lot about what artificial intelligence is, machine learning, and there are tons of books, tons of open course. For example, the course fast.ai is extremely good to learn what machine learning is. Machine learning by Andrew Ng on Coursera is highly recommended. In other words, try to get your legs under you. Okay, but that's the theoretical part. The second point is find a topic that you are passionate about. Could be hockey, could be sports, could be society. I don't care what it is. Find something that you're passionate about. Okay, and then apply that knowledge in that field to get your feet under it. And then if you have a certain basis, then you can go out and do more with AI for companies as a consultant. But you cannot go to a company, obviously, as a consultant and don't know anything about it. So, but that's one. So if you're new to the field, that is something that you can do. If you're not new to the field, for example, you already know what machine learning is, you know how to program that and all that stuff, then it's a matter of like, okay, what is it that you want? What is it that you want to do within the AI world? Because the AI world, the machine learning world, is very diverse, right? So you really have to find your spiel and try to get your head around it and try to maybe engage with companies to help them out. Could be, for example, if you're more of a business guy or girl, you might argue, you know what, I'm going to help you with the business strategy, how to implement artificial intelligence over the next 5 years to improve your company. If you're more of a data scientist guy or girl, you might say, listen, I'm here to help you implement this stuff. Okay, so there's the roadmap. I'm here to. So within that frame, you have to define where you want to play, what you're good at, but focus. Don't try to do everything at once because you're going to fail.
Yeah. There is one comment and question. I guess I'll just end on this point, Wilco. It says, thank you, Wilco, for a fantastic presentation. As always, I'd say that trust comes with being informed. How do we leverage this to have more informed stakeholders in order to use better, less explainable models?
How do we leverage this to have more informed stakeholders? This is a very good point. So when you build, and see if I understand the question correct, given this answer. One of the things that you need to do when you start to build or apply AI, John, as you said, in companies, is one of the things is get the right stakeholders around the table. So stakeholders are people from the business, chief financial officers, data officers, IT managers, people from the field. And collectively, in that stakeholders group, you have to come up with a decision how much of explainability, for example, you talk about explainability here, is required, and how much is it that you want to accept. For example, that's where it gets to very interesting conversations. For example, the CEO might say, I don't care, I just want a system that works, that makes money. While the chief data officer might say, hold on. Or the privacy officer might say, there is legislation, whether we like it or not, if you're in the healthcare industry, we have to deal with it. So you may not like it, but there is a constraint. So having that conversation upfront puts a stake in the ground, like, okay, this is the end goal that the AI system needs to do. And this is the road to the AI system. So for example, if they say we need at any point in time in the financial industry, for example, we need to be able to explain the model, anybody of us, at any point in time, then by definition, there are some AI algorithms that you cannot use, at least simply by the nature of the algorithm, at least not in this stage. But that's a decision that you need to make as a group. So having more informed stakeholders around the table from the get-go will avoid at the end of the day that you run into these kind of problems. So it's a very good point. The whole stakeholder meeting, what do you want to do with it? What are the rules of engagement, so to speak, before we even start? I've seen a very good point, actually. I've seen a lot of initiatives and organizations happening, and it's just a bunch of smart people somewhere in a room, and they think they built the next beautiful thing after sliced bread. And it may be true, but if it doesn't solve a problem that people care about, who cares? And if it's something that doesn't relate to the business and brings them in trouble because it's a black box system while they live in a regulated industry, you're in potential trouble about it as well. So that whole stakeholder engagement is absolutely key.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. I'm afraid that's all the time we have this morning. And thanks, Wilco, for providing such insight into the world of AI. When I left home for work today, my wife asked me what was on my schedule for today. And I said, well, I'm starting off at 8 a.m. with an hour-long talk on artificial intelligence. And she thought that was maybe a tough way to start the day. But I can report that it was very digestible and easy to understand, thanks to you.
Well, thanks for the kind words. So I know what you're going to talk to over dinner with your wife tonight. So that's
right. Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
No, I appreciate it. And anytime, and if people are still interested in wanted to know more or have a more engaged conversation, again, please reach out to me. More than happy to have a talk.
Okay. So before we close off today, I just want to mention that a couple of upcoming events at the Chamber. Our first live in-person business after hours in 16 months will be held next week, July 15th at Holy Whale Brewery in Riverview. So if you've been pining for the chance to actually get together live in person and talk to somebody without the use of technology, then we can do that next week on July 15th. And also, don't forget that registrations are open for our annual golf tournament, which will be held on August the 19th at Royal Oaks. Those spots are booking up quickly, so I'd urge you to check that out. And finally, nominations are still open for our Business Excellence Awards, which will be presented on October the 20th. So you can check our website, ccgm.ca, for more information on all these events. In closing, thanks again, Wilco and MLT for joining us today. And thanks to all of you who also joined us to tune in. Merci de vous être rejoints à nous. And please stay safe. Let's get to green. And we hope to see you again live and in person very soon. Bye for now.
Okay. Merci. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.